Good evening, and welcome to The Way Out Show. I'm your host, Dane McCarthy, broadcasting to you from FEMA Region 5, deep in the bowels of the United Police State of Amnesia. Today is February 24th, 2016, and we have a lot going on in the world as usual. The American election, the primaries are heating up. We have some amazing things going on. Donald Trump seems to be solidifying his lead over his main rivals, Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio, who are in second and third place and almost tied. And they seem to be fighting among themselves rather than trying to confront Trump directly. And they're waiting until one of them emerges from this fight for second place, and then they'll go after that. Whoever the winner is, he'll go after Trump. There's a lot of interesting wrinkles going on that appear to be happening in this election cycle, and it is more than usually entertaining this year. And of course, Donald Trump is no small reason for that. Because of his personality. We have not seen a populist politician with his kind of level of charisma and smarts and street smarts and just moxie and just plain old guts in many a long year and maybe in our lifetime. Now we have to remember that the rough and tumble, the circus of American politics goes really back to the founding of the United States of America over 200 years ago. So this is nothing new. Trump is really nothing new. There have been other populist, big-talking, braggadocio, macho guys, tough guys, street-smart guys who've been in American politics. In fact, that was almost more of the norm back then than now. And one of the biggest ones, of course, was Andrew Jackson. And believe it or not, some people have actually compared him to Andrew Jackson. Now, he had his faults, but he was an amazing politician. He was a military guy. He did some things with the Indians that he betrayed the Indians. He was forced. There are a lot of reasons why that happened, one of which was he was trying to save them, but a lot of them died by getting them out of the killing zone, is basically where they were in the East, wanted to get them out in the territories where they could be away from the ire and the murderous intent of a lot of the white people on the East Coast. But unfortunately, getting them there was the difficult part, and this is called the Trail of Tears. It's very bad. But in terms of the personality, Andrew Jackson had this very scrappy personality, even more so. He makes Trump look like a little wimp. I mean, this is a guy who actually would fight duels when he would argue with other politicians. And he would literally pummel you. And so he was really a tough guy. And of course, this is the story of our country. You have a lot of really tough guys. And of course, a person who's like Trump or any of these candidates, you have to be really tough. And just to survive this incredibly difficult and tumultuous time in your life, and of course, being president yourself, we've seen this over and over, how the presidents age during that 4 years or 8 years that they're in office. And we've seen this in Obama. We saw this in George W. Bush before Obama, how much both of them aged. It is very, very stressful. So the amazing thing is, of course, that no one thought that Trump would have a chance. Very few people thought, except Trump. And now it looks like that it very well might be Hillary versus Trump. And who knows how that will play out. Hillary's very tough too. Hillary has baggage. She's being investigated by the FBI right now, and I'll go into that later. But first, I want to show you a clip from our old friend Alex Jones, who does a boil down, a pretty good little 9-minute or 7 or 8-minute video about this latest dust up that Trump had with the Pope. Can you imagine? Well, the Pope said that the wall between Mexico and the United States that Trump proposes is unchristian, and people should build bridges instead of walls. Well, then Trump immediately shot back, how dare he, how disgraceful that a religious leader would question someone's faith, and also, especially when the Vatican, where the Pope lives, which is its own separate country, is completely surrounded by walls. And then some people tried to point out that no, the Vatican is not surrounded by walls, and then Alex Jones tries to straighten out that argument, or straighten out the problem with does the Vatican have walls or not. Well, we'll see what Alex Jones says in this clip. Let's go to the clip.
Grazie a Dio che ha detto che io sono politico, perché sia dove sia e non fare ponti non è cristiano. Quest'uomo non è cristiano, si dice questo così. E che sono una pedina, ma forse, non so.
I continue to believe Mr. Trump will not be president.
The establishment is definitely afraid of Donald Trump. Never before have we seen in the same week a U.S. sitting president and the biggest Christian religious leader in the world with over 1 billion followers criticize a presidential candidate. And the way they've misrepresented what Donald J. Trump stands for really shows you that he is the outsider, anti-establishment candidate. But just when I thought I'd seen it all, it happened. Since last year, when the Pope started calling for us to open our borders up and started saying that we were racist and evil for not doing it, I pointed out that even the New York Times admits Mexico has one of the strictest southern borders with Guatemala in the world, and upwards of a year in prison, forced labor, if they catch you trying to sneak in. So I said, why do we have to be wide open? And then once people get here, put them on welfare and make them collectivist Bernie Sanders voters. And then when I traveled to Rome last year and actually saw the 200-foot plus walls, on average over 90 feet, it blew me away around Vatican City, which they say themselves in the tours is the oldest sovereign nation, tax exempt, above the law in the world. And we pointed out it has armed guards, the Swiss guards, its own protective details. A few hundred yards in front of it is a huge armored fortress castle that also protects it, and it's where the Swiss guards stay. And all we were saying is, hey, Mexico has borders. Hey, other countries have borders. Saudi Arabia hasn't taken one Muslim refugee from Syria, but wants us to take more. And the Pope doesn't criticize Italy controlling its borders. The Pope doesn't, say get rid of their walls. And how did the New York Times and countless other papers respond? Hey, people, you're wrong again. It isn't a walled city. And they pointed out that there's an open square. The wall's cut in. There's a big open square with the famous obelisk brought there from Egypt, and that you can come there and basically worship the Pope or whatever. I've been there. I've seen it. It's giant walls with huge 50-foot iron doors and armed guards. It's just a concave area that lets you come in, but you're still without the walls. So it gives you that feeling of being in it, but you're not, and that's how they deceive you. So let's look at this map for ourselves. The only area open is this square to the rest of Rome, open to the sovereign city of the Vatican, Vatican City, to the public. But when you then look here, this is all an internal wall, and there are giant iron doors 50 feet tall before you enter the actual church. And then there are giant walls that have been there since the 800s when the Muslims invaded hundreds of times. But what they do is they deceive people and say, look, Donald Trump's people put out this map online showing the walls. And then they show the wall out here, which you see is open to the public to come in to the gates of the walls, feel like they're inside the church, but they're not. It's a holding area open. These are walls, just decorative. Big steel doors, armed guards. The Pope comes out on a balcony and talks to people. Then at night, they have big steel fences they put up and close off. And you try to even approach it, police cars pull up, like when we were there. But this is an internal area for folks to come in, but it's within the walls. As you can see, this is open. So the map they put out had this mistake, but they're saying, oh, there are no walls. No, there are huge walls and steel doors. And it continues here as you enter the church and other areas. Huge lines, sometimes 10 hours. We experienced it to get inside of this most famous of all walled cities that claims it's the oldest sovereign state in the world, doesn't pay taxes, doesn't take immigrants in, does whatever it wants, but is lecturing us, and now in the New York Times and everywhere else, lying to the public. So people are now spinning this saying, okay, you got us. Vatican is controlled. You can't just walk into it. There are checkpoints. There are big walls. There are drawbridges and steel gates. You're right, it's a big armored fortress, a castle, one of the biggest in the world. You're correct, but it was biblical times. It was back a long time ago. The more things change, the more they stay the same. It wasn't in biblical times. It was in the 600s, 700s, and 800s that almost all of Italy was overrun except for Vatican City. And thank God they had 200-foot walls because they were able to withstand the takeover. And so when the radical Muslims got kicked out, which wasn't the radical Muslims, it was mainline Muslims, they were able to reconstitute some form of Western civilization. You can say what you want about the Vatican, but they did keep a lot of the secrets developed in Western culture that were lost when the Visigoth Germans came in and took over Rome previously. Then later, 1,000 years later or so, you see the Muslims coming in. So you can go back to the entire history of what Rome has gone through, whether it was Alaric sacking Rome in 410, or whether it was the Muslims sacking it over and over again. It was the biggest walls in the world that allowed any of Christianity to remain and exist that wasn't overrun by the Islamicists. And no wonder this new pope that wants us to take all these radical Islamicists into Europe and into the U.S. wants us to get rid of our walls, but not his walls. I know that Donald Trump follows InfoWars some, and I would like to encourage him to double down. He's got a great private jet, to jump on it, to fly over to Italy, and to go up there with a camera crew and point out that the walls are there, and to try to go walk right through the front entrance at those big 50-foot steel doors and have them turn him away. And just in their face document that he told the truth and he pointed out the common sense. It's okay for all these other countries to have borders and to have fences. We even pay in Iraq and Afghanistan to build them walls and fences. But we can't control our sovereignty. If you don't have borders, then you're not even citizens. If anybody can just walk in and get everything for free, that makes citizens slaves of the folks that have come in. They pitch it like it's racist not to take unlimited people in from the world and then give them a free ride. This is the ultimate political correctness psyop. And the fact that Donald Trump's standing up against it is the reason I'm supporting him 110%. That's it for this special report. More special reports at Infowars.com.
Okay, that was the clip from the Alex Jones show, and I thought he did a pretty good job of making the case that Donald Trump was correct about the nature of the wall surrounding the Vatican City, which is actually its own country. And as Alex Jones pointed out, it's the oldest walled city-state actually in the world, and very, very ancient. You saw the photos of how thick and tall those walls are. Pretty amazing stuff. I've actually been to St. Peter's Basilica, the St. Peter's Square. That's the big round square. It's called St. Peter's Square. It's the center of Catholicism, of course. And he points out that yes, it actually is walled off, and you cannot just walk into Vatican City. It's guarded. And he points out that other countries also have walls around their country. Maybe not literally, but you cannot walk in. And whether or not it's a literal wall or you just can't walk in is the same to me. I mean, a border is a border. You cannot have a border but then not have a border at the same time. I've had conversations with people about this and said, well, why can't they just let all the people in who want to come in? I said, well, if you do that, you might as well just get rid of the border guards, because you're just wasting money hiring people to have a border, to protect the border, to patrol the border. Just fire them all or give them something else to do, that's not having to do with the border. So other countries have borders, and of course this is all part of a larger plan that we have to take into account. I've been reading lately about the Iron Mountain meeting, which I hadn't really heard of, which apparently took place during the Kennedy administration back in the early 60s. And the Iron Mountain meeting was a conference that was private, although apparently one of the members, one of the group that was involved, decided to clandestinely release, blow the whistle on the actual content of that very important meeting that took place in secret, which is not strictly legal, by the way. Our leadership is not allowed to have secret meetings. There's against the law. There's something called the Logan Act. Elected or appointed officials are not allowed to go to a private conference that the American people have no access to, because what they talk about there has a bearing on the welfare of the citizens of the United States. And we pay their salary, we elect them, we appoint them, or our representatives appoint them, and therefore what they say in a meeting we should have access to. Well, here you have an example at the Iron Mountain meeting that and it's repeated, this type of thing is repeated over and over in the Club of Rome meeting, in the Davos summit every year, in the Bilderberg summits, and the various illegal meetings that take place in which your future, my future, and the future of America is discussed and planned. And they claim, for instance, at Bilderberg that, oh, no, we don't talk about anything that is of any importance. It's more of just socializing. Well, then why is it secret? Why won't they tell us what they talked about? But it's very secret. Very high security at Bilderberg and Davos. You have layers and layers of security to keep everybody away. So the Iron Mountain meeting was very interesting. I really hadn't heard much about this before. But they apparently were wondering what to do to further their agenda of reducing the sovereignty of the United States. This is a worldwide effort, reduce nations' sovereignty, with the idea of making one world with no borders and no more countries, particularly United States of the planet Earth. United States of Earth is the idea. So imagine the United States, but the whole planet. And then all controlled from one central location, the entire planet, one world government. And whether that would be the UN, or whether that would be in Brussels, or in Berlin, or Paris, or New York, or Washington, that would be something that they would have to decide. In other words, a small group of men would run the entire planet. And one person would be presumably the chairman of this small group, or the director, or the president, or the emperor, whatever you want to call him. And he would literally be the most powerful man on the planet, and the most powerful man who ever lived on this planet in terms of worldly power. And this is a pretty scary thing for a lot of people, because knowing human nature, how power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely, which is the old watchword that is a truism, the temptation to consolidate that power and make sure you stayed in power, because there are always going to be people who want to take your place once you're the top dog, would be overwhelming, and you would use whatever means necessary that you had, and that would be all means. If you had absolute power, who could stand against you? There would have to be like a rebellion. It would be like a Star Wars kind of scenario where you had this small group of guerrilla fighters who are fighting against this incredibly powerful machine of death that just runs over everybody in its path, attempting to get to you, or attempting to put out fires of rebellion that keep popping up in different places. But so the people who went to the Iron Mountain meeting, they realized that this idea of a nuclear planet, the destruction of the world through nuclear holocaust, was not going to last forever, that they would need to find a substitute for it. Now, they'd been keeping people in fear ever since the end of World War II, using the Cold War, but it was beginning to unravel. I mean, people were catching on to the phony Cold War rhetoric. They weren't believing it anymore. Especially we saw this in the 60s, where I know younger people they don't understand this, but in the 60s, there was spoof after spoof after spoof of world leadership, and also the Cold War. It became a joke more and more and more. In the 50s, people believed it. In the late 40s and the 50s, they believed the Cold War. They believed that the communists were like demonic. They were not human. They were just evil. Well, then as it was revealed that the people in the West were also doing a lot of bad things, then gradually it was inevitable that there would be an undermining of the big lie of the Cold War, that it's us against them. And of course, the communists in Russia and China said the same thing about the capitalists. The capitalists are going to destroy you. They want to take away your wonderful communist government that takes care of you and gives you a job and a nice apartment to live in, or maybe not so nice apartment. Whatever the goodies that you're getting from the government in the wonderful utopia of the Soviet Union, the capitalists are going to take that away. And they're evil, et cetera, et cetera. And so both sides demonized the other side, but they knew, okay, what are we going to come up with? And so they came up with several ideas, and one of them was pollution. We will use pollution to reduce sovereignty, because air pollution, water pollution, it knows no borders. It crosses borders indiscriminately. And so therefore, the countries will have to work together, they'll have to communicate, they'll have to create agreements or treaties that transcend the borders of the sovereignty of the particular country. And you'll have international treaties and this would gradually, step by step, incrementally create a reduction of sovereignty in the world's nations. So pollution was one. And pollution was already an issue, but they decided they would ramp it up, they would make it worse, and really they actually went so far as to saying, we can make things really bad. We can make the pollution worse than it actually is. They understood that they could use the pollution issue. And we've seen this. We've actually seen this happen where the pollution is just getting worse and worse and worse. And no one seems to be able to do anything about it particularly. Why? We have the technology, but the will is not there. Why is the will not there to reduce the pollution? I mean, we keep getting new revelations, these horrifying revelations of these horrible chemicals that are being created in laboratories and then put out into products, and then without appropriate testing, thousands of these chemicals. And some of them remain in the environment and they get everywhere, like C8. You have the endocrine disruptors that actually feminize men and feminize women and cause cancer and cause children to go into puberty at a younger and younger age, so that we're actually seeing 6-year-olds in some parts of the world developing, going into puberty and menstruating and growing breasts and things. This is because of these chemicals that have been in the environment, polluting the water, polluting the air, polluting the soil, that actually mimic estrogen, endocrine disruptors, and change the timetable of the body, the human body. And we've seen this happen in animals. It happens in ponds and lakes and rivers and streams, where the frogs, for instance, and the fish and other aquatic life forms are actually changed, and you have one sex is created so that there's a very serious issue with the reproductive organs where they can't reproduce. There's way too many females or something, or you get also weird mutations which get it. And so this is something that's happening across the board. You have companies like Merck and Monsanto who are absolutely resolutely and fighting environmentalists every step of the way to create more and more toxic food stuffs. And they have it all figured out, where they will say, well, GMO food are substantially identical to non-GMO foods. And therefore, they do not need to be especially scrutinized, and they do not need to go through the process that would be required normally for some kind of a new food product that's being released on the market, because it doesn't change the food. And that's what they say. But at the same token, they actually patent that food. And how can you patent a food if it's identical to the other food? So they're having it both ways. And so they own it. They own the seeds. They own the plant, the GMO food, the corn or soybeans or beets or canola, and all these other plants. They're trying to do everything. They want to make everything GMO so that it creates, like the BT corn, creates its own pesticide that kills insects that try to eat it. And then it's having an effect on the humans that eat it, and it's having a harmful effect. It's giving humans who eat BT corn, who eat GMO corn and soy, gradually very unusual, normally extremely rare diseases, autoimmune diseases, where the body attacks itself, such as Guillain-Barré and lupus, where your whole insides are just being eaten up. Very, very serious diseases that were almost unheard of. They were so rare before, and now they're becoming more common, more common, more common, more common. Horrible birth defects from the pollution. So the pollution issue is being coupled with the global warming, and this is going back to the Iron Mountain. Another recommendation was we could use global warming as a uniter. You need to have an enemy, and the people at the Iron Mountain meeting said, well, we can't find an enemy that everyone could unite around and give us the impetus to create a one world government that people would deem necessary, because it's a global threat. So their idea is, if you have a global threat, then you have a stronger need for global government. So there was no global threat, and that's why they said, well, we will have to invent one. They literally use the word invent. Invent an enemy. It has to be global. It has to be existential, in other words, extremely dangerous, life-threatening. And so they thought, okay, we can use global warming, we can use pollution. Another one they came up with was the idea of using refugees as a tool to break down the borders and reduce sovereignty and destroy sovereignty ultimately. Because if you get enough people from other countries all flowing from country to country in an unchecked manner, without borders, then you destroy sovereignty. There is no sovereignty. It's just done. It's a done deal. When there are no borders and people can, and so this is something that's happening now. I mean, this sounds very familiar. We're seeing this happen in an unprecedented manner. And people say, well, yeah, but America is a country of immigrants. Yes, that is true. The indigenous people, the American Indians, they also, you could say, they were immigrants too. That was before America was a country. But since America has been a country, you had to go through a very rigorous screening before you could get into the United States. When you're coming over on a boat, you stopped at an island, and you've all seen the movies about the island. And if you had a disease, if you had tuberculosis or another problem, you could be jailed, essentially, quarantined for months. And if they wanted to, they could send you back to Europe or wherever you came from. And so, in other words, there was a controlled immigration, a legal immigration, and you got your passport stamped that you were allowed to come in and you were allowed to immigrate. Well, nowadays, there is none of that. I mean, there's very few people who are allowed to get into this country or these other countries legally. It's very difficult. But without borders, then people just walk over the border. And actually, it's quite a bit more complex than that usually nowadays. It's very dangerous and expensive to walk over the border on the south side of the United States. Now, people have noticed that the Canadian border is wide open. It appears to be wide open. But for some reason, maybe it's because the Canadians are not that interested in immigrating to the United States illegally. They like their country, apparently. But unfortunately, in Mexico, people are being horribly oppressed. There's incredible levels of violence. There's poverty. So they're willing to spend a lot of money to these coyotes to get them across the border, across this incredibly dangerous terrain, desert, into the populated areas of the United States. And so it costs them sometimes their lives. And yes, these coyotes do rape women who cross over illegally. They have them under their control. They can do that. And what are the women going to do? So when Donald Trump and others have mentioned how dangerous it is and how crazy it is that people should be allowed to come in illegally. They're not exaggerating. It is dangerous. It's expensive. It's illegal. They could be picked up. They could be returned home. And so when Donald Trump suggests a wall, and I don't know what he means by a wall, but a border that actually works is the solution. An actual border. And as Alex Jones pointed out, the border between Mexico and the countries that are south of Mexico is very, very strong. So why doesn't the media go after the Mexicans for their very, very strong southern border? According to what Alex Jones was saying, you can get some serious prison time in Mexico if you're caught illegally crossing that southern Mexican border. And I'm assuming the same thing would happen for an American. If an American would cross over illegally into Mexico, he could go to jail for a year at hard labor. And those Mexican prisons are no picnic. So this is not a sensible or legal or reasonable or fair way to run a country. There is no rule of law if the laws are ignored or only enforced selectively in certain areas or for certain groups. This is important. But so right now we're looking at the possibility that Donald Trump would be head-to-head with Hillary Clinton. And why not Bernie Sanders? It's because I think Bernie Sanders knew from the outset that he really didn't have much of a chance against Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton is the one that was the chosen Democratic candidate, but they needed someone to run against her. So they chose this old guy, and they chose this O'Malley, I think that was his name, O'Malley, or the governor from Maryland, who's a pretty successful governor. He seemed like a very reasonable guy, but for some reason he just couldn't get any traction. Everyone wanted to see the first a lot of people, Americans, wanted to see the first female president. And I guess Hillary Clinton thought she would have a lot of creds from the Bill Clinton administration. But, you know, over the years, the Bill Clinton administration, although it had some points that Americans really liked, there was a lot of negatives. And the Monica Lewinsky affair really turned the American people against Bill Clinton in a lot of ways because they were disgusted by that behavior. And it turns out that this is kind of the way he behaves a lot of the time. He's apparently sort of addicted to the sexual shenanigans that he's been involved in. And this could be very well kind of an ongoing thing for him. And so this is not moral for a lot of people, and they question him. And for Bill Clinton to be the first husband or the first man in the White House, he'd be the first one, is kind of a scary thing. Now the story is that I'm hearing is that if Hillary Clinton gets to be the President of the United States, she will appoint, or she will use her power to essentially help Bill Clinton get to be the Secretary General of the United Nations. Now there's another interesting wrinkle to this. That would be amazing. If he did get that they would be the most powerful couple on the planet. And this would be unprecedented, amazing development. And now I think that the Bush family, they wanted to get to be in there somewhere, but they're out of the picture. Jeb Bush has dropped out of the race. He's gone. He was not a strong candidate. He never really could stand up to Trump. And Trump is like a scrappy Queens street kid who knows how to push the soft, pudgy prep school boy around and show him who's boss in a kind of a very schoolyard manner. But again, this is a hallmark of American politics. And we're not the only country in the world that does this. Britain is very scrappy in their elections, in Congress. Anybody who's watched David Cameron, for instance, giving a speech, or another politician, oh, he's interrupted constantly. People in the audience are screaming at him. This is in Parliament. And so maybe a lot of our scrappiness comes from that British system that is so antagonistic toward each other, yelling and making jokes right in front of the guy and hollering things at him. I mean, it really is remarkable to see the British, how they operate. You think of the British as being so stiff upper lip and very proper and puritanical maybe, but they're really not, at least in their politics. And you have a very wide open British press as well, with accusations being thrown back and forth in these tabloid newspapers. And America has its American tabloids are looked upon as low class or working class. See them in the supermarkets. The tabloids were powerful and still are a powerful force. And you have crusading newspapers like The Guardian. One thing that's nice about The Guardian and The Telegraph, the Daily Telegraph, is that they don't have the constraints in talking about American politics that we often see in American newspapers like the New York Times, Washington Post, Los Angeles Times. They are treading on eggs because they are beholden, they are controlled to a certain extent by these powerful forces that do not necessarily have the American people's interests at heart. They have an agenda, they have a plan for the 21st century. Agenda 21, which is now called Agenda 30 or Agenda 2030, lays it out pretty well. Again, reducing sovereignty, destroying sovereignty, creating the one world government. A top-down command and control structure which would be very unlikely to be a democratic structure. It would be more of a fascist dictatorship. We're seeing a lot of this happening already in the EU. The EU, I've talked to people who live in Europe. I talked to a young woman who lives in Sweden, very concerned about how little effect that they have on their leadership that are not in Stockholm, but are in Brussels, in Belgium, a whole nother country. And they can't really reach and affect. They have those decisions that are made that affect them. And this is a complaint all over Europe in the EU. The leadership likes the EU, but the people on the ground, with perhaps maybe the left-wingers more accepting of the EU, the United States of Europe, they're not, many people I was in 2 years ago in England. I talked to people. They're not very happy about it. They like UKIP. UKIP is a United Kingdom Independent Party, I believe it's called. And it is more of a libertarian almost. They want to get England, or the United Kingdom, out of the EU. Now, they've already refused to join the euro. They wanted to keep their pound system. And of course, with the euro's in trouble, now the pound is actually in trouble. Europe, the finances of Europe are in trouble. They're in trouble because of the refugee crisis. Now, it's true apparently that Germany did need more people. They're not reproducing very well. They're just not having kids to keep the tax base up. I can remember when Germany was expanding in the 60s, they also imported a lot of workers, and those people are probably still there. They were from Turkey, they were from Greece, they were from Italy, other more poor countries where people didn't have jobs. I actually went over as a teenager and worked in Germany for a summer, part of a summer, as part of that workforce that they needed during that expanding time. This is in the middle 60s. They were a booming economy at that time. And of course now, Germany has the most prosperous, powerful economy in Europe. And they're doing quite well. But a lot of people are being traumatized by this inflow of illegal immigrants who are just walking into the country, and then the people of Germany are expected by the government to take care of them, to house them, to feed them, clothe them, get them on their feet, pay for it all. And then the people are not acclimatized to life in modern Germany, very westernized. Girls going around in skimpy outfits and so on with their hair uncovered, very appalling to the Muslims, many of these Muslims. And we have to remember that the Muslims, although we are told by the media that they're from Syria, actually only about 15% are actually from Syria. They're really from many other countries, many North Africans, many from Balkan countries, many from other Middle Eastern countries besides Syria, such as Lebanon, Jordan, Iraq, Iran, if they can get out of Iran. So they are immigrating from the Middle East to, I guess, to Turkey, and then from Turkey they go in small boats over to the Greek Isles. There's several islands. And then once they get, or maybe they don't go from Turkey. Yeah, it's a very short distance between Turkey and the Greek Isles, some of these islands, like Lesbos. Small little islands, very poor, except they prosper from tourism. And a lot of these Greek people who live on these islands are incredibly angry, upset, because they're being overrun by these illegal aliens. And they're having to take care of these people and move them on further up into mainland Greece, and then from there to the next country, Macedonia, to the next country, and make their way to Germany, make their way to Denmark, Sweden, Norway. Those are the countries that they really want to go to. They would love to go to England. In fact, amazing situation in Calais. Calais is the entrance to the Channel Tunnel that goes underneath the English Channel. And you could drive a car through there. They have a train, or maybe they just have trains. They go underneath it. Amazing engineering feat. They actually got 20 miles underneath, and then it comes out in England. And you have armies of mostly young men in Calais literally trying to force their way into the Channel and walk underneath the English Channel to England. They want to get to England so bad. Fighting with the guards, fighting with the police, terrorizing the townspeople in Calais. I've been to Calais many times, and I've never seen anything but a very quiet, orderly city, small city. Absolutely incredible. And you have people from Africa going to Sicily, going across into Spain, some of them dying on the way. The word is out for people around the world that if you want to get to the EU, you can. They will take care of you. And they have a generous benefit package. And people are just getting fed up with this. And so that the various countries, many of them are instituting borders again. And this is exactly the opposite of what the EU is all about. The EU is about dissolving those borders and getting control for Brussels of those countries and creating one United States so that France as a country wouldn't even exist anymore. France already has the highest number of Muslims of any European country. And they're not assimilating very well. There's a lot of conflicts with the French people. And the French think that that it is not in their tradition for a woman to hide her hair underneath a hijab, the scarf that they wear. And they don't like it. And there have been attempts to actually create a law saying that it is illegal to wear that in France. They're sick of it. And the French are very, very proud of their country. If you go to France, and I've been there, if you try to speak English to a Frenchman, even if that Frenchman knows English, he will oftentimes pretend that he doesn't know English. While you're talking to him in English, he won't talk. He wants you to at least make an attempt. And you know these brash Americans, it's like, do you speak English? Hey, he's going, if I came over to your country, he would say, would you expect to have to speak French to me if I came over to your country? No. You would expect me to speak English to you. So why, if you come over to my country, should I have to speak English to you? You're in France now. You should speak English. You should speak French. And so you have to make an attempt to speak French. And maybe they will take pity on you, and they're sick. They don't want to hear you butcher their beautiful French language, and maybe they will start speaking English with you and give you a break. But that's the way the French are. They're very proud people. And they don't like people, foreigners, coming in and not learning the language, dressing differently, not dressing like French people, and bringing in this tradition that is so alien to French culture. And the Frenchmen like to see pretty girls walking down the street with their hair flowing in the wind and their legs showing and their arms showing, and that's part of the fun of being in France for them. And I understand. And so this idea that women somehow need to be covered up is it's un-French. It's not French. And if they feel like you're in France, you should behave like a Frenchman. You should take on our culture. And I've actually seen, this is on the good side, I've seen video of a Muslim woman who's second or third generation. And guess what? She was not wearing a headscarf. And she still considered herself to be Muslim. But she spoke perfect French. Very beautiful woman. Wore her hair loose, uncovered. Wore Western style clothes. So this is possible. It is possible to do this, that people could adapt to the traditions and norms of the country that they move in and not lose their religion. It's ridiculous, it's absurd, I think. And why would a woman want to cover up anyway? I mean, in the summertime, I could see covering up in the winter, but in the summer as well, how uncomfortable it must be to wear those long robes year-round, and it just, it doesn't seem practical for a country. Now, I could see maybe in a desert country where you want to keep the sun off you, and the blowing sand or whatever, it seems to be you're covering up because of the weather and the environmental conditions in a hot desert country. But to bring that into France, that just doesn't make any sense. So there needs to be a give and take in cultures, and many Muslim people are contributing very much to French society, to German society, to English society, and just like the Hindus did before then. If you go to London, you can get a wonderful Indian dinner curry from an Indian restaurant. It's great. And that's kind of really good. I mean, England needed that. England cuisine is really not that good. It's sort of this heavy, doughy, greasy meat pies, and these greasy French fries, and this is the British. They like eat Brussels sprouts and overcooked Brussels sprouts and overcooked peas, and they mash up the peas, and the ethnic food that comes from India is actually a welcome change to what the traditional English food offers. Roast beef, for a vegetarian, it's not very good. They have these awful sausages that are half made out of grain, which I guess for a vegetarian is a good thing. But if you don't want to eat any meat, why bother? Because it still has some meat in it. And that's from the legacy of World War II, when there was meat shortages. And so they figured out a way to make a sausage that sort of looks like meat and maybe a little bit tastes like meat, but is really half grain. And so they got to like those. It's like that's how it should be. There should be a little bit of give and take. But to get to the point where you no longer have an identity as a Frenchman, as a German, I mean, that would be fine too, I guess, if human nature was such that everything worked out just dandy, handy-dandy, if everything was controlled from a very small group of men, hundreds of thousands of miles away. But unfortunately, given human nature, it's not safe to put that much power in the hands of a small group. So you need to have your power local, your leaders need to be local. They are more responsive to your needs if they are local. And you will not be sacrificed for a greater good. This is one of the big dangers, is that this always happens. Those who are considered inferior or unimportant or not influential or poor in a top-down command and control structure, they will invariably be sacrificed. So there's a very strong reason to keep things small and local. So that's all there is for today. Have a great weekend and sleep well, friends.